the News Channel 5 network. This is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Glad you are with us. We are, of course, counting down the days now, less than a week until the presidential election. Of course, people are voting. They're voting in droves in Tennessee and all across the country. But tonight, we're going to be talking about an important demographic, the Latino vote. How will this demographic decide this election? Will it decide this election? How important is this demographic in swing states here in Tennessee and all across the country? And what are some of the big issues that Latinos will be basing their vote on? We have with us tonight two people on different sides of this issue, to be as fair as we can be. And happy they are joining us via Zoom, as all of our guests do now. We have Raul Lopez. He is with the Beacon Center of Tennessee. He's a board member and supports President Trump. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. I do support President Trump.
Well,
thank you for having me, bro.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here. And Julio Salazar. He is a data director for the Tennessee Democratic Party. And I can tell from the signs you support Vice President Biden, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks for having me on as well.
Well, thank you again. Thank you both for coming on. So before I just have a debate, let's agree how or come to some sort of consensus about how important this demographic is. And I'll ask each of you that. And give us some opinions and some facts. How important is this demographic right now nationally in swing states? And I'll let you start, Julio. When we're talking about this demographic, how important is it?
Yeah, it's been well documented that the Latino vote will be the deciding vote in the future of Democratic and just American politics. We are the fastest growing population in the country, and we are the fastest growing voting population in this country. Here in Tennessee, we're the fastest growing population in the state, and we'll decide elections and we'll make this hopefully a more purple state. And in Texas, you're seeing that today, being marked from a lean red to a toss-up state for the first time in a generation, largely because of the incredible increase in Latino vote in Texas and across. That's happening in Nevada, it's happening in Arizona, and it's happening in the swing states in the Midwest, in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So Latinos will decide this election and will decide every election moving forward.
Wow. Okay. Do you agree with that, Raul? What do you think?
Oh, totally. Whichever side you're on, Latino vote is huge. In fact, we have already surpassed the African American vote. So we're at least 13.5% of the voters. And like Julio said, it's in the battleground states, we're critical. When you talk about Arizona, Nevada, Texas, and of course Florida, it's huge. And our vote is definitely needed, and it's being courted, and rightly so. The key is to get Latinos to vote, and that's both Julio and I would agree that that's probably our biggest goal, is just to get Latinos to vote either way. Because we are the largest growing, as well as right now the largest group. Next, we've surpassed the African American.
Well, now that's fascinating. And it is fascinating the impact the Latino vote will have in these swing states. And I want to get into that. But I'm interested in what you said, Raul. The issue is getting them to vote. And so I'll start with you, then ask the same of Julio. Is that a problem? Why aren't they voting? And what needs to be done to get them to vote?
Well, there's a large history in our culture not to necessarily trust voting and government. So we got to get past that barrier. But more importantly, I mean, a lot of us Latinos are just workers and hard workers, and we're really focused on that right now more than anything else. Also, we've been disillusioned. I mean, Democrats for years have said, they're courting the Hispanic vote, but yet they've been kicking the can about immigration issues. And then on the Republican side, a lot of Latinos, in my opinion, wrongfully so, thinks that Republicans don't necessarily care about them. So a lot just aren't voting. But I think the tide is changing, and both Julio and ourselves are working very hard to do that. In fact, the president was the first one to start having outreach in Spanish-speaking commercials and outreach to the Latino community. And Biden and Harris also are doing that considerably. So we're doing it. It's just going to take some time.
And why do you think, Julio, that there is an issue or at least a concern about Latinos voting in the numbers you'd like to see?
Yeah, two very simple words. The same reason that African American vote is so hard to get. It's voter suppression. For a generation and a half, the Republican Party has won in most states because of voter suppression, because vote numbers are down. If you see historically, when people vote in historic numbers, as you're seeing now in 2020, as you mentioned, Ben, Democrats win. And voter suppression is rampant across, especially southern states, and in states where large Latino populations exist. The Latinos who aren't well educated in school and aren't well educated civically about how to vote, how to register to vote, how to stay registered to vote. Voter purges that take out Latino voters when they don't vote in a municipal election because they don't know the election's happening. And then you see long waiting lines. And as Raul rightly mentioned, the Latino in the United States is largely a working class who can't take 6 hours, as in Georgia, to stand in line and vote. And for me, that's the answer. It's voter suppression, that we don't make voting in the United States, who is supposedly the number one example of democracy in the country, don't make it easy to vote. And that affects mostly poor people. It affects Latinos. It affects Black and African Americans. It affects white rural Americans here in Tennessee, and that's why people don't vote.
So let's have both of you make your argument. I mean, why? And so Raul, we'll start with you. Why should Latinos vote for President Trump?
Well, before that, I want to disagree with him. I don't believe there's any voter suppression. I think that's our roles as parties to educate them and get them out to vote. There's no suppression. Everybody has the same ability to vote, whether you're white, Black, or Hispanic. I don't care who you are, you can vote. I've voted for years. I work with a lot of Latinos who voted for years, but there's not. I would disagree that it's suppression. But that being said, of course it's important. This election is probably, if not the most important election ever. Whether we go to more government control, or more freedom. We go to more fear or more freedom. So I think that the important thing is education. And we're doing everything we can, and I'm sure Julio and the Biden campaign is doing the same thing. But I would disagree. It's not suppression. It's just lack of motivating your own voters. I am working with a lot of Latinos right now, a lot of churches, especially here in Tennessee, and they're excited to vote. And especially after what's going on with riots and all that things that they just don't align themselves with. Latinos are mostly for pro-life, they're more for the economy, for education. And so I think they're very eager to vote this time.
When you go out and identify, and then I'm going to go to you next, Julio, but Raul, when you go out and identify Latino voters that you feel like could vote for Trump, where do you go? Is it churches, and is it the pro-life argument, or what is your primary argument?
Well, mostly we go out in grassroots and just talk to talk. And yes, we go to the churches. Unfortunately, the Latino community only hears from Univision and Telemundo, and local organizations that are very, very left. And they don't give us the whereabout to tell our point of view. And thank you for allowing this today. But 9 times out of 10, we're not allowed to compete with the liberal machine out there in the press. So mainly grassroots, and that's why it's starting to grow. And I'm very confident that our percentage is going to rise considerably this time around, especially in Florida.
And Julio, what would you say? What is the argument? Why should, you talk to Latinos, why should they vote for Vice President Biden?
Very clearly, I'll say because of the coronavirus epidemic. In the state of Tennessee, 1/3 of all coronavirus cases have affected Latinos populations, when we only make up 5% of the entire state population. Here in Davidson County, the hardest hit area with the least amount of medical support is happening in Antioch in Southeast Nashville, which is predominantly a Latino population community. It's happening because of multi-generational homes. It's happening because Latinos can't work from home largely. It's happening because of lack of education about masks. And it's happening because of a lack of leadership, both from the president and from our own governor. who has spent, as you reported on this network yesterday, $4 million on a mask campaign, and yet he himself has refused to wear a mask publicly, has been to boat rallies with people that he's not in his own personal circle, and who refuses to implement these cares that we know save lives. And besides that, I mean, all the things Raul said, it's not that Latinos don't want to vote. It's that Latinos have historically been disallowed from voting. And when you see now how easy voting has become, that we're, for the first time, I think in my generation for sure, seeing this kind of voter registration drive, that we're talking about expanded early vote locations, that today the Secretary of State here in Tennessee and the USPS have allowed one mail drop-off ballot box per county on election day, and expanded hours on early voting, expanded mail-in balloting. All of that is exciting, and it makes Latinos want to vote more because they're able to do it. If we continue down the track of closing our polls at 6 p.m. on election days, having no information about early voting, and lying about how mail-in balloting is dangerous, you will continue to see low Latino numbers because we're not making it easy.
So,
well,
all right, go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead, Raul.
Well, as for COVID, I'm on the governor's task force, so I don't know where Julio's talking about, because we have contacted every church. We have weekly testing throughout the state. In fact, we reached out to organizations like Conexión, the Nashville Hispanic Chamber, the La Paz in Chattanooga, and others that didn't want to work with us, which was very unfortunate. But we still carried on, and we're having weekly COVID testing and education. The website is in Spanish, and we get the pastors to know. So I don't know where the COVID misinformation he's talking about, but it's definitely out there, and we're definitely reaching out. And if those other organizations, Julio, would join us, we'd get out the information even quicker.
It's not misinformation. Ben's own network, Channel 5, reported yesterday about the $4 million campaign that it has a disconnect from the governor's own advice, that he refused for months to talk about how mask actually saves lives, left it up to counties who all did 95 different ways of handling this virus. And because of that, 22,000 Tennesseans are dead, 1/3 of those being Latinos.
Well, 10%, the majority of Latinos are in Nashville and Memphis, run by the mayors, which are Democrats, and that's why they didn't want us to help us. No, they're not run by Democrats, and they have their own information out there through the Hispanic Chamber, Conexión, and La Paz, and Memphis, Latino Memphis. So I don't understand how we can do any more. Again, we have asked them to join us. We have asked them to give out that information, but they have refused. And it's unfortunate for political reasons. But as for voting, COVID is not the number one concern for Latinos. Trust me on that one. We're like everybody else. It's the economy, and it's about the education. We want to have a steady economy, which was there prior to COVID. Hispanics had the lowest unemployment rate ever. And that can't be, Latino women started new businesses in a record pace. The average family brought in $6,000 more per year. He created opportunity zone. Home ownership with Latinos was up to 50%. So economic was off the roof. There has never been an economic boom for Latinos than under the Trump administration.
Well, let me ask you, Raul. Let me ask you, Raul. All right, so one of Trump's very famous sort of campaign promises was the wall, build a wall. How does that play when he's talking about build a wall, or even some of the other language that Mexico is sending us rapists and criminals? How does that play, and how do you feel about that?
Well, number one, even President Obama said that we support illegal immigration, but we also support law and order. So a wall keeps us law and order. We don't support anarchy. A lot of us are fleeing from countries that have anarchy, and with legal immigration comes also sex trafficking. It also comes drugs. It also empowers gangs and cartel, and that's why a wall is very important to prevent that. Also, as Julio said, it's very important about COVID. These people are coming untested and sneaking into borders. Unless there's a COVID testing somewhere when they're coming in illegally, we have no idea if they have it or not. So immigration is that. And by the way, the Biden-Obama administration deported more illegal immigrants than any other administration. So it's kind of disingenuous to say that the Trump administration is trying to keep immigrants out. We're just trying to keep illegal immigrants out, especially ones that have never been tested, and we have no idea what they're coming in with. And also that trail sponsors.
Do you feel, though, his language when it comes to immigrants is problematic or not?
Well, no, not necessarily. On some cases, yes. In some cases, no. But I look for the policy more for the words. Democrats have been saying words for years. Biden has been around for 40-some years. The president was around for 8 years. The first 4 years, he promised illegal immigration reform. And he had the Senate, both Biden and Obama had the Senate, the Congress, the first 2 years, and the presidency, and they did absolutely nothing. Like they've done for years. They've kicked the can down and they take us for advantage of us.
All right, what do you think, Julio? The notion of the wall and some of the language from Donald Trump, how does that play into?
Yeah, Ben, and if your viewers will notice that Raul didn't answer the question about the language, and he didn't answer the question about the wall specifically. If you look at the actual data, which is what my job is, data director for the Texas Democratic Party, the own Department of Homeland Security notes that the majority of drugs that come into this country from south of the border come from major ports of entry, not from these spacious lands in which we have to build a wall. That's documented fact. The second fact is that the president promised for 1.5 years in his campaign that he would build a wall and that Mexico would pay for it. And 4 years in, the wall has not been built and Mexico has not paid a single cent for that wall. So talk about broken promises, that's Donald Trump's #1 promise. And from the first moment we saw him in public political life, and this is something that Raul completely glossed over, and he's talking about trying to get Latinos to empower themselves to vote. I'm talking about leadership from the top down. And when a president comes down an escalator and says that people who look like me, people who are like me, Mexican American immigrants, are rapists, drug dealers, and not their best, what message does that send? We should aspire to have a president, whether you agree with him on policy or not, who inspires and is a good example, not just for ourselves politically, for me, Raul, and you, Ben, who are in these circles, but for our students, for our children. I was a first grade elementary school teacher, and I had to turn off the news, and when I had to answer those questions about why does the president think or say these things about me, how do you respond to that? Joe Biden is the better answer for that. That language matters, especially when it comes from the President of the United States and the leader of the free world. What he says directly inspires acts of violence, inspires hate crimes. That's been said by the FBI, and it's been said by every single security agency in Washington, that those words directly impact and lead to hate violence. When a president calls a Mexican-American immigrant a rapist, and then you see targeted violence against Mexicans in Tennessee, that's directly related.
All right, what about
he was talking out of context. He was talking about illegal immigration at the time. And also, I want to say that I did not gloss over the wall. I said the wall is needed so we don't have anarchy here. We have to have a law. You have to have a law. Why come in here legal? And then when you stated that most come through certain areas, it's because that's been recorded. We have no idea what comes in.
We do have an idea.
Unless you have connections with those that are here illegally, you have no idea what's coming in here.
I have connections in data.
Well, that issue is less important to me. And I guess for Raul, I'll ask. It does seem like it would be off-putting to have the president saying some of the things he says. And so let's say you're talking to a Latino voter, obviously, and the Latino voter says, I'm a little off-put by some of the things I'm hearing from the president. What do you say? What is your argument back? How do you say, well, what do you say? If they say, well, I'm disturbed by him talking about rapists and the wall.
I say this president gave you the lowest unemployment rate in history, documented. This president has brought us more women business owners in history. This president has brought you $6,000 more per year. This president has created opportunity zones so we develop our inner cities so you can work. This president has given you home ownership. This president has given you school choice. to empower the parents to pick which schools to choose and not limited to them by failing schools based on the zip code they live in. Instead, they empower the parent to choose. The president also wants our kids back to school. So it's all about family. Our president is pro-life, which most Hispanics are. Democrats now are even proposing having abortion not only to the end of 9 months, but some cases they're asking to allow abortion after a baby is born. Our president has been the most religious. He signed the Religious Act. Religion is very important to us. Our president has encouraged for us to join together in churches again. And let me tell you, I talk to over 100 pastors every month, and we meet throughout the state, and they're all very supportive of the Religious Freedom Act and the ability to end abortions.
All right, so you would talk about the economy, pro-life, religion. What would you say?
Education.
Julio, education. So they, you're talking. You're trying to convince a Hispanic, Latino voter, and they say those things. What do you say?
Yeah, well, just going off what Raul just said, the economy, the boom that Raul and the president like to talk about didn't come from the president. That was 8 years of Obama and Biden recovering the country after the greatest collapse thanks to George W. Bush. And then 2 years into his presidency, Donald Trump blew it. And this year with coronavirus, absolutely mishandled everything. We've seen the most unemployment we've seen in a generation. We've seen Latinos completely out of work or having to choose between their life and health and continuing to work. And then when you talk about education, I don't know what school choice, Raul, you're talking about here in Tennessee, because the school choice voucher that Governor Lee has talked about and has pushed for, people didn't even want. In Knoxville, they voted for it only on the condition that it wouldn't happen in Knox County. So the school choice is, I don't know where you're coming from on that one. And then you want to talk about religion from this president, a president who has divorced 3 times, who has cheated twice, who has paid off porn stars, and who talks about religious nuts. You've seen the pictures of him laughing at people when they're blessing him, and who says they'll listen to anything he says and they'll believe.
Have you ever met the president, Julio?
No, I have not.
Have you ever prayed with the president?
No, I have never.
Okay, I've met with them several times, prayed with him. He wasn't laughing. And also, when I walked into the West Wing, there was 3 Hispanic women in high places constantly working with them. I met with over 100 Hispanic leaders. We sang worship. We sang praise songs in the White House, which would never happen with an Obama-Biden administration. So,
and it shouldn't
so
happen.
maybe what you're saying is theory, but it's not reality. Until you meet him and have been in a religious gathering, you really don't have much to say on that.
Well, we've seen it for 5 years. We've heard it for 5 years, and we've seen it for longer. We've seen the way he talks about women and what he's done to women. We just saw his own. The Federal Court of Appeals said that the Justice Department couldn't defend this.
He's not going around kissing women's hair or kissing young girls' hair, and
no, he's just assaulting them. And
so
all right. Well, this kind of gives a sense of I see. It gives a sense of the argument. I kind of wanted to lay things out, and now we're going to start taking calls. So hang in there. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back. If you want to call, few lines open, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.